This may be another long review because this is not going to be just about The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I'm going to talk about the entire Conjuring universe as a whole. So I'll start off by saying The Conjuring 1 and 2 was directed by James Wan. He's responsible for the direction of the first Saw, which, in my opinion, is his best film work for direction. That's just my opinion. He's responsible for the direction of Insidious, which I saw the first one years ago. I don't fully remember it, but I did enjoy it. There were a lot of tropes in the horror aesthetics of it. From what I remember, there were a lot more jump scares than I anticipated, and I don't like jump scares, I'll just preface that. Then he made The Conjuring 1 and 2, which, when it comes to horror, I usually compare horror films with the masterpieces such as Hereditary. Hereditary, to me, isn't necessarily a horror, it's more like a psychological thriller, but the beauty of Hereditary is that its aesthetics and its setting and the direction and pacing was just pitch perfect, and the mood that encapsulated everything revolved around it was just beautifully shot. So when I watched The Conjuring 1 and 2, I'm actually in the minor 1% where I actually enjoyed The Conjuring 2 more than the first one. Now, both were directed by James Wan, and I do like the Conjuring movies. They are really good pieces of horror film. I really always enjoy James Wan's horror direction. He usually sticks to aesthetics and settings rather than jump scares. So I enjoyed The Conjuring 1 and 2. Then I got into the spin-offs, which were Annabelle, Annabelle Creation, Annabelle Comes Home, The Nun, The Curse of La Llorona. I believe that was all of the spin-offs. It doesn't really matter, because honestly, I didn't like any of them. There were some that were a little better than the others, such as Annabelle Creation, but all of them were just so lackluster and weak for the universe. And I'm pretty sure it's because those weren't based on true stories, but the Conjuring films are. My problem mostly with the spin-offs was that they focus so much on jump scare horror. And that's fine, you can do that every now and again in a film. It can be effective if shot and filmed correctly. I'm not against jump scares. The problem with the spin-offs for The Conjuring is that they focused on jump scares. Even with the story, somehow the story's focused on jump scare horror. And the stories were very weak. The jump scares and the horror aesthetics of them, was just the most abysmal thing about them. But again, I'm going to preface this again. The Conjuring 1 and 2, I really enjoyed watching those as their own films, as, the first and the second in The Conjuring. I honestly, at this point, wish they would have just stuck to just The Conjuring franchise rather than The Conjuring and then all of these spin-offs, because in my personal opinion, my personal critique, all of the spin-offs are terribly filmed, terribly written, terribly acted, just bad. So now we get to The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. So The Conjuring 3, James Wan is only a minor role in the production of this film. He's no longer the director, he's not a writer, he's a producer. One of the producers, that's it. The director of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It is Michael Chaves, who directed The Curse of La Llorona, which, as you already heard, my take on The Curse of La Llorona, just like all of the Conjuring spin-offs, it was terrible. So, in The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, I'm very conflicted because there are a lot of really good things in this film. Mainly the story. It actually has a surprisingly different narrative, a surprisingly different kind of storytelling, and I really genuinely liked the story. the story revolves around another person that is possessed at the beginning, and then the possession, the devil, intentionally goes into another person, an older person, and then later in the film they end up murdering somebody, and all of this is in the trailers, but they get caught up by the cops, and then they get thrown in jail, and it's actually a good story balancing between past mysteries of vanishing girls coincided with a legal fight for why and how he committed the murder but didn't commit the murder. And I really appreciated that story. I thought that for possession type films, a story like this where it blends religion and possession into the law, I thought that was really fitting. Finally, they actually put all of these murders into a court system, and I really appreciated that narrative. And another thing I really appreciated was the villain of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. Not just the fact that the villain looks like the different gendered version of the one possessed, which I thought was actually pretty cool. It was kind of like, especially when it was that character dealing with them, it was kind of like a reflective mirror. But the villain itself, how do I explain this? They encapsulated the aesthetics within their presence. They embodied the horror, and the villain story coinciding with the main character possessed, coincide with vanishing girls in different cities and whatnot. I thought that the villain and the narrative was very strong in this. I thought that it was very centered on its story, but it also broadened the scope. And I really appreciate that. I did like, there were some parts in the first act, especially in the first act, not so much in any of the other acts after, but in the first act, there are parts in the writing where somebody cracks a joke here and there, and they are genuinely funny. One or two jokes in horror is fine. But here's my problem. This film, it's not interpreted as a comedy or anything, but there are a bit too many funny lines in the first act where there are times where you're laughing and then you start thinking to yourself, why am I laughing so much? And maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just because I'm facetious. I'm all kinds of humor. I like humor in life. I think it brightens the day-to-day. But there were just a lot of lines in the first act of The Devil Made Me Do It where the lines themselves and the jokes were genuinely funny, but there were so many in a horror film, and it didn't feel right. It felt very inconsistent. Not really tonal shifts or anything, just kind of the quantity. The quality was fine for the jokes, but it was more so the quantity of the jokes. There were too many for me in the first act. And here is the worst thing I can say about The Devil Made Me Do It. Directed by Michael Chaves, and unfortunately, he brings in a lot of the jump scares from The Curse of La Llorona. Now, this film isn't dedicated to just jump scare horror. There are a lot of parts in The Devil Made Me Do It where the visual imagery and the aesthetics and the setting all around, there are scenes that encapsulate the psychology of the possessions and the visual aesthetics, where it is a beautiful scene to watch, but a lot of the times they focus on jump scares a lot more than I would have liked. And another negative I have about this is between what I said about the jump scares and a couple good shots of visual imagery evoking suspense, which those were good scenes, but not nearly as many as the first two Conjurings because of the over-reliance of jump scares. And I know I'd already prefaced that, but that was a whole nother negative on its own. So overall, I like The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I'm much more conflicted about this one than I am the first two. The first two held up mostly fine when compared to the likes of Hereditary. The Devil Made Me Do It, I would say, is a lot better than the Conjuring spin-offs, but it's definitely the weakest in the Conjuring trilogy. I mean, it's the third one, so it's kind of expected for filming at this point. But this isn't a terrible film, so I can at least say thank you for at least delivering another film that's not terrible at all, that doesn't make me want to vomit at the end. So, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, it's more than an average film, but there are still a lot more negatives than the first two Conjurings. Not as many negatives as the spin-offs. So overall, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. Thank you.